Every history book calls him the Quiet Sultan, the one between two legends. But the man history forgot to interrogate built more of the Ottoman Empire than the man it worships. Because Orhan Ghazi is remembered as the founder, but Osman never ruled a city. Osman never held territory big enough to call an empire. His son did. If you think the Ottoman Empire was built by conquest alone, your heart is about to race. Two questions before anything else. First, how does a second son, born on the edge of nowhere, end up ruling from a captured Byzantine capital within 3 years? Second, who actually benefited from 35 years of relentless Ottoman expansion? Orhan, sitting in Bursa, or the men he sent to bleed for it? By the end of this video, you will know exactly how one ruler turned a tribal raiding band into a functioning state, and exactly what it cost the people closest to him. Picture the moment first. Sogut, early 1320s, a dying founder, 2 sons standing over him. Everyone in that room knows the throne is not settled, because in the Turkic tradition of the time, the eldest son does not automatically inherit anything. So here is the impossible situation. Aladdin, the elder brother, has the stronger claim. Orhan does not. For the first time in this fragile new state's short life, succession itself becomes the threat, not the enemy outside the gates. And that's when something happens that almost never happens in dynastic politics. Aladdin steps back. He does not fight for the throne. He becomes something the empire had never had before, a Grand Vizier, the first in Ottoman history, and hands his brother the crown. But a gift like that is never simple, because now Orhan owes his entire reign to a man who could have taken it from him. Therefore, the first decision Orhan ever made as ruler was not a battle. It was trust, untested, unproven, and permanent. Within 2 years, he took Bursa. He made a captured Christian city his capital before he had even secured his own family's loyalty beyond one brother's goodwill. From provincial frontier lord to sultan of an expanding state in less than 3 years. You should know that this story is far stranger than the postcard version taught in textbooks. And you will find everything promised here. A brother who gave away a throne, a gamble against a Byzantine emperor most rulers wouldn't have dared provoke, an earthquake that handed Europe to the Ottomans by accident, and a death inside his own family that changed who would inherit everything. All of this is documented, and the part that gets left out of the highlight reel is the coldest part of all. What made a state built on raiding suddenly start minting its own silver coins, building schools, organizing a standing army? And who was really pulling the weight while the Sultan took the credit? We start where the sources start, not with a battle, but with a deathbed, and a decision that could have destroyed everything before it began. To understand how a second son secured an empire, you first need to understand what nearly stopped him before he began. Orhan Ghazi, the second Sultan, son of Osman, grandson of Ertuğrul, born into the Kayi tribe somewhere between 1281 and 1288, in a border town called Sugut that no Byzantine mapmaker thought was worth naming. Second son was not a title, it was a warning, because in this world, birth order guaranteed nothing. 14th century Anatolia was a shattered board. The Ilkhanid Mongols were collapsing. The Byzantine Empire was still wealthy, still fortified, but rotting from civil war within. Small Turkic principalities circled each other like wolves testing a wounded herd. Imagine standing at Sugut in 1324. You hear no palace ceremony, no court fanfare, just the low murmur of tribal elders arguing succession in a tent that smells of horse leather and wood smoke. If Orhan failed here, the entire Ottoman project could have fractured into a rival-claimed inheritance before it ever built a single mosque. But his brother did something almost no historical figure in this era does. Aladdin refused the throne. Therefore, the new state's first crisis was solved not by war, but by one man's restraint. And that's when the real work started. Because holding a throne handed to you by a brother is not the same as earning one. Orhan had to prove immediately that the gift wasn't wasted. He moved on Bursa within 2 years, a besieged prize, wealthy, walled, Byzantine to its bones. He left the frontier camp behind. He was riding toward a fortified city his father never managed to break. He had no idea an emperor across the water was about to make the mistake of underestimating him completely. Start with the mistake, not the triumph. Bursa's siege dragged for years, a public failure his father never lived to see resolved. The numbers should have ended this quickly. Bursa's Byzantine garrison was isolated, cut off, and outnumbered by the encircling Ottoman force. one well-supplied fortress against a besieging army that controlled every road leading to it. But sieges are not decided by numbers, they are decided by patience, and Bursa held for years before it finally fell in 1326. After, sources note, Osman had already died, so the father who started this fight never saw it won. Therefore, the first thing Orhan inherited as ruler was somebody else's unfinished war. He turned Bursa into more than a trophy, he made it a capital. Mosques, religious schools, dynastic tombs, a functioning seat of government, not a raided outpost. So the next test came from the water, not the walls. Emperor Andronikos III marching to break Ottoman pressure near Nicomedia. This was not a raid. This was the sitting Byzantine emperor, in person, betting his own army on crushing the upstart before he grew further. The Battle of Peloponnesus, late 1320s. A confrontation most border lords would have avoided outright. You do not provoke an emperor who can call on the wealth of Constantinople. But Orhan's forces won, because the same civil wars weakening Byzantium from within left Andronikos with an army that could not fully commit to a foreign frontier while enemies circled at home. History tells us the emperor was wounded in the retreat. The sources are not fully certain, but the outcome is not disputed. A Byzantine emperor had personally lost to a border lord's son, so the sieges accelerated. Nicaea fell after prolonged encirclement. Nicomedia followed roughly a decade later. Two of the oldest Christian cities in Anatolia absorbed one after another. And here's the part that should chill you. None of this was inevitable. Every one of these Byzantine cities could have held. Every one of these campaigns could have stalled the way Bursa nearly did. He had just proven he could take an emperor's army, but an emperor's army was never the real ceiling on what he could take next. Before we continue, if this story is pulling you in, subscribing helps us keep bringing you narratives like this. 1 second. That is all it costs. Now, back to Orhan. By the 1340s, Orhan was no longer a frontier lord being tested. He was a ruler other rulers needed. Because the collapse of Ilkhanid power let him fold the rival Karasi principality into his own around 1345, for the first time, Ottoman territory touched the Dardanelles. A land route to Europe existed where none had before. So when Byzantine politics fractured again, this time between rival claimants John V and John VI Cantacuzenios, Orhan was no longer choosing sides in someone else's civil war. He was the deciding weight on the scale. He allied with John VI. He sent Ottoman troops across the water to fight for a Byzantine emperor against Serbian forces under Stefan Dusan. Think about that reversal. A border lord's son, one generation removed from a raiding tribe, propping up the throne of the empire his father had spent a lifetime fighting. The alliance was sealed the old way, marriage. Orhan married Theodora, John VI's daughter. He had already married Nilüfer Hatun, a Byzantine noblewoman who converted after the marriage and became the mother of his heir, Murad. But alliances built on marriage are still alliances built on debt, because now Byzantine politics and Ottoman politics were tangled at the bloodline. Therefore, what happened in 1354 was not conquest. It was opportunity, seized in hours. An earthquake struck Gallipoli. Its walls, its defences, shattered in a single night. Orhan's son, Süleyman Pasha, moved troops across the strait and took the city before Byzantine authority could even begin repairs. For the first time, a fortified European foothold, held permanently, not raided and abandoned. Every previous Turkic incursion into the Balkans had been temporary. This one stayed. So think about what that means. Not a planned invasion, a natural disaster, exploited within days, becoming the single most consequential territorial gain in early Ottoman history. The Ottomans were no longer just an Anatolian power pressing on a weakening empire. They were now, permanently, a European power. And that's when the story turns inward. Because the same son who took Gallipoli, the heir being groomed to inherit everything his father built, did not live to inherit it. Süleyman Pasha died before Orhan did. A father who had outfought an emperor, outmaneuvered a collapsing empire, and outbuilt every rival principality around him, could not outlive his own succession plan. He was near the end of his reign by then, decades of conquest behind him, and the one certainty he thought he had, who comes next, had just been taken from him by something no siege, no earthquake, no alliance could touch. Orhan died in Bursa sometime between 1360 and 1362. Natural causes, the sources agree. No assassination, no battlefield death, nothing dramatic enough for a chronicler to need to explain away. But natural causes undersells what he was leaving behind, because the empire he handed over was unrecognizable from the one his father died defending in a single frontier siege. He had minted the first Ottoman silver coinage, a state announcing, in metal, that it intended to last. He had reportedly laid the groundwork for a standing military structure, the seed of what would become the Janissary system. He had built schools and religious foundations in every city he took, converting conquest into permanent administration. So the empire Murad I inherited was not a raiding confederation. It was a functioning, coin-minting, city-holding state with a foothold in Europe that no predecessor had ever secured. Here is the hidden layer few retellings sit with. Suleiman Pasha, the son who took Gallipoli, who should have inherited all of it, died first. Murad became heir not by original design, but by his brother's death. The empire's most consequential territorial gain, Gallipoli, and its most consequential succession, Murad's rise, were both, in different ways, products of things Orhan did not plan and could not control. An earthquake handed him Europe. A death handed him his successor. He was buried beside his father in Bursa, in the same dynastic ground where this entire story began with a deathbed argument between two brothers. So ask yourself what that circle means. The man remembered as quiet, transitional, the bridge between the founder and the conqueror, built more permanent territory, more institutions, more of the actual state than either of the men history prefers to celebrate around him. But is that fair? Or is it just what luck and one brother's restraint allowed him to claim?
We are back at the door. Sögüt, a dying founder, 2 sons, 1 throne. The question was never really about how Orhan won it. It was about whether he ever fully belonged to it. History offers competing answers, and they do not fully agree. Credits Orhan directly, the conqueror of Bursa, Nicaea, Nicomedia, the victor of Peloponnesus, the builder of coinage and schools. Complicates that picture, pointing to a Byzantine empire already fracturing from within, an Ilkhanid collapse that opened Anatolia for the taking, and an earthquake, not a general, that delivered Gallipoli. Much of what looks like strategy in this reading is also timing. This event remains genuinely contested, with most surviving detail coming from later Ottoman chronicle traditions written to celebrate the dynasty's founding, not from neutral contemporary observers on both sides. Therefore, the honest answer sits between both readings, so neither version alone is the truth. The third lives in the silence between them, in a brother who gave away a throne and asked for nothing we know of in return, never explicitly credited as co-architect of everything that followed. What survives is what the chroniclers chose to preserve. He was the second son, not supposed to inherit anything. The door is still there.